Great. Thank you. Thank you, Lindy. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for spending a little bit of your afternoon with us to talk about peer-to-peer media literacy and resources for secondary education. As Lindy said, I'm Sarah Stevenson. I'm the librarian for education at Vanderbilt University's Peabody Library, and I'm joined by my colleague, Emily Bush, who is the instruction and digital learning librarian at Vanderbilt as well. So during this session, feel free to make yourself comfortable, take care of what you need to. These are being recorded, so you'll have access afterwards. But I know we all come to these long days of virtual conferences with excitement, hopefully, and by the end of the afternoon, we're all a little tired looking at screens. So take care of yourselves as you listen. So before we get too far into our presentation, just wanted to take a second to give you some more context for the project that Emily and I did, and then I'll share a little bit about where we're going. At Vanderbilt University Libraries, we have a fellowship program called the Buchanan Fellowship Program, which allows undergraduate students to apply and participate in an experiential learning opportunity that's led by professional librarians and faculty partners. So these projects allow students to explore and learn new skills, learn how to use the library. They conduct some of their own primary and secondary research, and ultimately they create some kind of object at the end that they can present and share with the community. So some students will create an online exhibit or multimedia, such as a podcast. Our students that we worked with created open educational resource modules on a topic related to media literacy. So last fall, kind of how this project began, last fall, Emily approached me and said, hey, I have an idea. And that's really how a lot of great projects begin in the libraries. Bringing her background in media literacy and my experience working with pre-service teachers and doing education research, this kind of project was born. So we wanted to give undergraduates space to explore a media literacy topic of interest to them and generate some kind of open educational resource, a learning module that could be used in the secondary education context. So that's just a little bit of background on the project overall. And I'll go to my next slide here, give you an idea of where we're going today. So we want to share with you first just some of the philosophical and theoretical foundations for the fellowship program project that we developed. And then we'll share a little bit about our process for setting up this fellowship. So what was our structure, just some of our planning behind it, how we developed relationships with the schools, and also sharing a little bit about our syllabus and kind of the overall flow of the project that we did. It was conducted over a semester. I don't know if I mentioned that. And then we'll share how it went. So our implementation, what that looked like, and we'll give you a little sneak peek at their projects and share how you can access those if you're interested. And then finally, we'll share what assessments we conducted and some reflections on that. The final thing we'll talk about is some ideas for implementation of these ideas in other contexts. So for us, we were doing this project within the confines of a fellowship program that we already had in place. But we know that and we have some ideas about how this could be done in other scenarios. So we'll share those and give you all a chance to brainstorm with us as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Emily to share more about how we implemented our project.
Okay, so the inspiration for this fellowship really came from a realization I had. It wasn't a new realization that I'm increasingly out of touch with like the youths and teenagers, but I'm very much interested in media literacy and the media literacy landscape that teenagers are facing. So I thought to myself, Vanderbilt students are pretty sharp. So what if they created some learning modules centered on a media literacy issue that they wish they'd been taught about in high school? So that question, what do you wish you'd been taught about that you weren't, was really the focal point of our proposal. So the description here on the screen came out of our proposal for the fellowship, and Sarah disseminated the information through her channels at Peabody. Peabody houses the education students. So we were thinking that we would get a lot of education majors as applicants, and we actually ended up with only one education major. There were 4 fellows in total. The other 3 were econ, and surprisingly, the other 2 were pre-med students. But our hope was that by creating these OER learning modules, that teachers and instructors who maybe choose to use these modules in their class, maybe some of you will choose to modify these and use them in your instruction, would share with your students that they were created by these slightly wiser, slightly older college students. So we grounded the fellowship in open pedagogy, and so engaging students as creators of information rather than as consumers. And a bonus with open pedagogy is that it's been shown to intrinsically motivate students, which you need when students are taking part in a fellowship that they don't get a grade in. They kind of need to be intrinsically motivated, although we should point out that they were getting paid a small sum to participate in the fellowship. But our hope was that this project would be something meaningful rather than just a throwaway assignment, because they would be creating something for their peers. So I pulled this quote here on the screen from a paper, Intrinsic Motivation to Learn, the Nexus Between Psychological Health and Academic Success. When students are intrinsically motivated to learn, they learn more, exhibit better behavior, are happier, and aspire to contribute to the betterment of society. And I want to come back to that last part about the betterment of society when we talk about the reflections of the students, because it was really our hope that they would appreciate doing something that goes beyond what I've heard referred to as the Vanderbilt bubble. So the implementation of the fellowship. These fellowships take place over 12 weeks, which is not an entire semester, but it's pretty close. And as mentors, we get to choose how we want to deliver our content. So I sat in on a fellowship last semester that met every week and was seminar style, but we didn't really think that was the best approach for this one. We decided to go with more of an independent study model. Our students only met twice in person, and they otherwise met with us for check-ins. So Sarah and I each had 2 students. We had 4 fellows total, so it worked out well. We each had 2 students that we mentored. And the bulk of the course was set up in Brightspace with regular check-ins with us, the mentors. So we had an initial welcome session where we laid the groundwork for our expectations, knowing that because students aren't getting a grade and there aren't really things that they're going to be turning in throughout the semester, that it might be difficult to make sure that students stayed on track. So we were very careful to line out due dates and benchmarks for students to meet over the course of the semester. So in addition to the welcome session, we had a peer review session where students shared what they'd been working on toward the end of the semester back in April. So that Brightspace course consisted of readings on topics that we thought students might not be familiar with. So things like what is OER, Creative Commons, universal design and accessibility, inclusive design. And we pulled some worksheets from the OER Starter Kit workbook. We discovered along the way that students wanted specific examples. I think maybe we took for granted that we were going to have education majors, which ended up not being the case. So We ended up adding in some very specific examples of lesson plans and OER modules that we thought looked good. We had initially planned for students to present their materials to public school students and backed off that pretty early on, I guess before we even submitted the proposal, because we were worried that we wouldn't be able to find placements for students to present their materials. What ended up happening is that we did find placements for all of the students who wanted to present their materials. We made it optional. But Vanderbilt students are so hard to schedule that only one ended up presenting in the schools. But we did have them email with school librarians as part of their primary research. And what we were hoping that they would learn from these were the Metro Nashville school librarians is what media literacy is being taught and what gaps do they see in the media literacy education. So over the course of the semester, they were doing this exploration and research with the final goal of creating this OER learning module. So that was the big deliverable. And in addition to that, all of the Buchanan Fellows have to submit a short reflection. So the OER learning module, the steps that we had them take to get to that final deliverable was to select a topic, and we had them do that the first week. So very early on, adding the caveat that it's okay for this to evolve as you get into your research. And they had to establish learning outcomes, choose their Creative Commons license, develop their action plan, create a lesson plan, and create a learning module. And they wanted us to tell them exactly what should be in that learning module, which we could not, but we suggested beyond the lesson plan to have some sort of active learning activity and assessment that would go with it. And then finally, they submitted their materials to the OER Commons in the Vanderbilt Libraries group within the Tennessee Open Education Hub. And then the final piece was that reflection, and we'll share a few of those later on. We gave them 2 prompts to go with the reflections of what skills did you learn this semester and how has your view of the library changed? And I'll pass it over to Sarah to talk about what the students came up with.
Great. Thanks, Emily. So our students, as we mentioned previously, kind of came from different academic backgrounds. So that made it kind of interesting because we were originally thinking like we'll have education students, so this will be great because they'll have an understanding or baseline foundation understanding of how to create a lesson plan and those kinds of things. But because our students were not necessarily in that academic field, we felt that we really needed to help kind of give them some more examples along the way. All of our fellows came in with a seed of an idea of what they wanted to create, which was great because they all sort of were excited about the topics that they chose, and that kind of prompted them to explore and create some really neat resources. I will say some of them had a little bit of a higher learning curve. That we had one that was an ed student and the others were not. And so our education student was like ready to speak to secondary students, and they're the ones who actually did go and present. Our others were shied away a little bit towards the end at the idea of actually going and using their materials to teach students. So there was also a scheduling challenge there. So I wanted to give you a chance to kind of get a sense of the different projects that our students did. So I will just go through each of those. So the first project was called Mobilizing Young Voters through Social Media and Best Practices for Online Social Activism. So this student created a learning module that helped secondary students learn about democracy and media related to political activism. So they learned about voting requirements and just generally how they could make a difference in the political landscape and how to engage with the media that's out there and kind of determine what's credible and not. So this session also used a lateral reading assignment with the students and to help them engage a media source and think about those things that they encounter on the web. So, like I said, she presented at a school. It was shared at Hume Fogg High School as a lunch and learn for a group of civic-minded students who are part of a group that combines young Democrats and young Republicans, and they discuss different issues and talk together. So it was a lunch and learn that was sponsored by the library, but it was students who are sort of already motivated to learn about these topics and think about them. So it was great that I'm glad that we had one student who was able to test out their resources that they created. The module, I will say, is linked from this QR code on the screen, and in a few slides, we'll have the one that goes to the hub where all 4 of their projects live. This module included a slideshow, she created a lesson plan, and then I love that she also created an assessment Kahoot at the end to say, okay, you've learned all this content, now let's see what you remember. And can you kind of effectively make some discernments about the media you're encountering? So that was the first project. The second project was on social media and mental health. So again, we had a couple of students who were interested in health sciences and kind of the intersection of media and health sciences. So this one was for students who've grown up in the digital age, and kind of the idea behind it was, you're learning from a peer who's also grown up in that space and has had technology in their hands from, early childhood on. So the students who would engage with this content would come out of it knowing more about how social media in particular can impact mental health. And how they can have some agency as individuals over how they engage with social media. So it's sort of designed to raise awareness of, how social media is designed to function and work with our brain chemistry, but also, how can students assert their own agency about how they engage with those tools. So this session included, again, slides, a lesson plan. She also created an assessment Kahoot, but she also created a really great review video on YouTube and a habits worksheet for students to think through how they engage with social media and how it impacts them and what kinds of things can they do to develop a healthy relationship with social media. The third project was called Paging Dr. Google, how to use digital health information for conversations with your healthcare providers. So this one was designed not to dissuade students, but to help them think about how to use their digital resources to find good information on their health, but to be equipped to take that information and have informed conversations with their healthcare providers. So there was that piece of discerning, what's a good source? How do I wade through all of this information related to my health? What can I rely on? But then how can I take that and use it to have an informed conversation? So this one was divided into 3 modules instead of 1. So it could be taught as either a workshop or a series of sort of mini workshops. It included a lesson plan, slides with links out to various videos on different topics that were introduced. And I will say the lesson plan for this one included a lot of discussion activities that you could run in your classroom setting. And then the final one was media literacy, eating disorder information. So again, thinking about how does media interact with our health, and helping secondary students really think about what am I taking in, and is it an accurate portrayal of what it means to be healthy? So this one particularly focused on TikTok as a medium and how influencers in particular can impact how you think about yourself and your body image. And so that was kind of the focus of this one. She had an infographic that she created to use in the classroom and slides again, and there were some discussion activities included as part of the lesson plan, and an opportunity for students to create their own resource to share out. So as you can see, all 4 projects kind of took a different turn, but there was several that were very similar in the sense that they talked about like health information specifically. So it was kind of interesting to see where these projects went. One thing I will say about the projects is that initially all of our fellows were thinking they wanted to create some kind of video resource to convey their content or some kind of multimedia thing, but they all ended up leaning heavily on what I would say is more typical modes for delivering content. They all created a slide deck, and their lesson plan were, most of them had discussion questions or like think, pair, share recommendations for how to have the students engage with their resources. So I think, for future iterations of this, we'd want to think about structuring it in such a way that encourages them to maybe try a different modality than they're used to. So, instead of just relying on slides, maybe create a tutorial or a mini podcast or, some kind of new tool. For them, I think towards the end, they were just so busy that they all sort of were like, never mind, I'm not going to make a video. That requires a lot more work than I realized. So that's why I think a lot of them ended up with their slides, which are great. Don't get me wrong. But we would have loved for them to experiment a little more. So all of their projects are available on the Tennessee Open Education Network. And as we mentioned, part of their learning process was to think about what kinds of licensing they wanted to use. So all of them are licensed under a Creative Commons license of their choosing. So the students all thought through and talked through what license do I want to apply to my materials to make them available. And we talked with them about, the value of having things be out there for people to use or remix. So that was really great. I see we have a chat here. So someone's asking, you mentioned this was done much like an independent study with check-in meetings. Can you talk a little bit about how much guidance they received throughout? Great question. So my students, I met with them. We talked via email. Initially, we had face-to-face conversations weekly. So I scheduled a Zoom or meeting in my office with mine until it seemed like they were confident and ready to go with their project. That was kind of part of our structure. Was initially we required their meetings and check-ins, and then towards the second half of the semester, we said, email us to let us know how it's going, but you don't have to come meet with us unless you have questions. Then come on over. It wasn't super heavy-handed like instruction in those conversations, though. We definitely were like, hey, have you read the module for this week? Go look at the readings. If you have questions about lesson plans, for example, please take a look at the ones that are in our LMS for you to look at, and let's have a conversation if you have questions about it. So we really relied on them to look at the materials we were providing. I don't know, Emily, if you want to jump in and say anything more about that.
Yeah, I think Sarah had some of the more wayward fellows. Mine were pretty on the ball. So I started giving them the option of whether to meet in person, or I would just email them some guiding questions to respond to. So I think we were really just going with our gut instinct on whether they were making progress through the fellowship toward that final deliverable or not.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking it. And I'll get into that a little more with our reflections in a minute here. Let me show you one more thing here with their modules, just so you can see what it looks like in case you haven't been able to get to the hub. So all of the modules are on their own landing page. Some of them opted to put a graphic up, which I love how that looks. And then from here, it's a lesson plan is listed with links out to the different resources and a description. All of them created kind of in their lesson plan description of where you would use the different resources that are linked in their module. So like in this case, the student had it set up so that you would do it in 3 parts, and their slides were there, and they had suggested activities listed under each, so the students would watch a video and then engage with the activity that's described in the lesson plan. So they all kind of took a similar format. We didn't prescribe how they should do it, but they looked at different examples that were already in OER Commons, and I think kind of relied on the models that they'd seen. Right. Well, with that, I'll turn it over to Emily to share about the reflections.
Okay. So in the reflections, students were generally positive about the impact of the fellowship. And most of them also expressed that they were surprised at the types of resources that the library offered, and that they hadn't realized that these fellowships went beyond like archival. A lot of them are based in special collections. So if I have audio share, I was going to play you a bit of one of the recorded reflections. So they had the option to either write their reflection or record it. So let me know if this audio doesn't come through.
And I love being able to connect in this fellowship to librarians that focus on digital media literacy in specific, because I think this is a topic that really needs to be discussed more in schools. And I love that this particular fellowship gave an opportunity for me as a Vanderbilt student to utilize the vast resources that have been given to me at this school to create something that can actually help to educate those who have not had the same opportunities in education as me. And in that sense, I think this fellowship program at the library is extremely impactful, and not only just helps to, only keep these resources for ourselves, but it really creates something that spreads beyond the Vanderbilt community. And I found that extremely impactful.
So we were really happy to hear that idea of creating materials that go beyond just Vanderbilt students was meaningful to them. This next reflection
I love being able to
echoes that as well. Although I had initially thought that most library projects would be archival, I sincerely appreciated that this endeavor allowed me to engage with the Nashville community and create an open educational resource that could be implemented in many secondary education settings to educate and empower teams as digital consumers of health information. And then this final reflection I wanted to share because I thought as educators, we can all relate to this. This is the student who presented. As an education major, I learned the valuable skill of patience through the fellowship. During my presentation, there was little to no engagement from students, and as I was talking, I got really discouraged. But as I was packing up, one student did mention that he learned something new. So the biggest takeaway is, even if you think the lesson didn't land, just wait a little bit longer. So I thought that was a great takeaway. Several of the fellows also mentioned that they had a greater appreciation for how long it takes teachers to create even a short lesson. They didn't realize how much time and effort we put into things. So they have a greater, at least these 4 students have a greater appreciation for that now. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention assessment. We created an assessment that we were going to administer to our fellows, but Sarah and I were both new to the Buchanan Fellowships. I don't know if we mentioned that. So this was our first time around for both of us. And we created this survey. Then we found out that all of the fellows are given this survey that's here on the screen. And a lot of the questions mirrored what we wanted to know. So we didn't want to give them 2 surveys and for them to be redundant. Unfortunately, we found out that we don't actually get the data for this survey. So all we have in the way of assessment is the reflections and obviously the final product and our verbal conversations with the students. But I think that's a good segue for our personal reflections of what we might do differently.
Yeah, so I'll share a little bit about that. I know we've shared a few things throughout, but just wanted to kind of encapsulate our thoughts on this. Working with undergraduate students was different in my role. I mostly work with grad students, so it was good for me to remember that they are different in some ways and the same in others. So deadlines we found were really important and helpful for our students, especially because this was more of an independent study type project. It was helpful to have in our LMS in Brightspace to have things be a fake assignment. I mean, we weren't assigning grades to them, but because it was a system they're already used to, it would prompt them to turn things in. So we used the assignment feature to have them submit a few of the pieces of their project, like their lesson plan and those kinds of things. So that was helpful to keep them kind of on track and have some accountability throughout. The other thing we learned was that they really valued concrete examples. And I think some of this we've mentioned is because they weren't necessarily as familiar with a lot of this with new information, like how to set up a lesson plan, what even is assessment, like how do I do that with high school or middle school students, and selecting material that would be appropriate for that age, I think was a learning opportunity for them too. So giving them examples, I think, was a really helpful thing to get them to give them just some ideas. The conceptualizing the abstract was a little more challenging for them. The third thing I want to mention is communication. So as Emily mentioned, I had a little bit harder time with my fellows. They all turned in, good projects at the end, but we learned that it can be a little complicated if you have really busy, highly engaged undergraduates who are just involved in a lot of activities. I'm not confident that all of our email communications were read. I'm not sure if that's y'all's experience working with undergrads, but we know that they rely often on like text messaging and that kind of thing for quick conversations. So we sent most of our things to them through the channels that we have at the university. We have email and we have an LMS. So those were the 2 ways that we primarily connected with them. So something for the future, I think we thought through was possibly relying more on the messaging through the LMS because they seem to get notifications and look at them. Like when we graded, I put that in quotes, when we gave them feedback on their lesson plans, they all looked at it like immediately. Whereas the emails, the responses were sort of less reliable. So just as a side note, we kind of feel like it might be possible that we could utilize the messaging forums in our LMS more than email. Our students, as we mentioned, are super involved. They had jobs, they had dance competitions, they had all kinds of stuff going on. So that's something to keep in mind if you're thinking about doing something like this, is to kind of get to know or maybe survey your students up front as to how committed they are to other activities, if they really can commit to something that's going to be a regular meeting or something like that, just to see if they are actually able to meet those time commitments. And the final thing just is scheduling. We had waffled on whether or not to have it be a regular group meeting or to be, this more independent model where we meet one-on-one with them. And again, because our students were very busy, it worked out better for us to do the one-on-one meetings. So that's just something to think about if you're thinking about doing something like this, is the scale, like how many fellows you're going to accept or how many students you're going to work with. because you have a lot going on, obviously. And so you want to make sure that you have a manageable amount of, time to work with the students. And the final thing on scheduling is when you're working with a school, or in our case, we had talked about potentially doing these, having the students present in schools or in a public library setting. We had kind of gone back and forth on what might be possible. With a school, you have to let them know they're not as flexible on their scheduling. So you have to kind of hopefully have enough time to communicate with them early on, what the content is, who the speakers are going to be, and have that set in stone earlier on. Because we were bound by a semester, I think that kind of made it challenging to get and arrange a specific date and time that worked with our students and with the schools. So all those things are just things to keep in mind as you are, as you're building this. Like Emily said, this was our first foray into this adventure. And so we learned a lot of things along the way that I think we'll apply in our future fellowships. So with that.
And I'll add to what Sarah was saying about getting into the schools, that I was really kind of surprised, and maybe this just shows my ignorance of working in public K through 12 schools. I was really surprised. One of the schools that we tried to get the social media and mental health lesson into, I did not realize it had to go all the way to the school board, where it was rejected as a topic. That they didn't want to open that can of worms, I guess, but it seems like a really important can of worms to open. So that really surprised me as well, although we did end up finding that student in a different school system somewhere to present. And then there were the scheduling conflicts that we talked about, so it ended up never happening. But we wanted to talk about some ideas for implementation, ideas for other contexts, because we realize that most libraries don't have the ability to pay students for their attention, because as we mentioned, the students were paid to take part in the fellowship. So some ideas that we had for that, the first two kind of tie in together. I feel like pretty much all instruction librarians do one-shots in some form or another. So thinking about whatever active learning exercise you might normally do, search exercise, evaluating sources, or trying something completely new, like how ChatGPT can be your research assistant, but have students create the assignment. And if you have a relationship with a faculty member where you know that you're going to be in their class every semester, you can then take that assignment in the next semester, let students know that this is a student-created assignment, have them approve upon it, and think about questions like, what did they get right? What could be more clear? How could this activity be more fun? And having to think through that really encourages metacognition and that intrinsic motivation to figure out, how do I teach this so that the next group of students will have fun and learn whatever the goal of the assignment is.
Some other ideas that we thought through were taking a scaffolded approach to teaching. So if you are working with faculty or you're highly engaged with a particular faculty in a course, you could develop with them or co-create with them an assignment that could be broken up over the semester. You could do mini sessions where you introduce a concept, or maybe a flipped model where you have the content in their learning management system and have them meet with you at some point during the semester. There's lots of ways that you could have them build towards a deliverable at the end of the semester. And that model, again, is a high engagement model with faculty. So, if you have a faculty partner who's interested in a topic like media literacy, or it fits really well with the course objectives, you could pitch it to them. but that would be a possibility. The final thing that we brainstormed really was just, transferring this into a 4-credit information related course. So because we had developed a semester long, syllabus with the content already, this would translate really well into a credit bearing course. And you could think about incorporating additional things to build engagement, like have a discussion forum for the students to discuss the topic that's introduced each week, or bring them together in the classroom to do some kind of activity that's based on the content that they pre-worked on. So there's different ways that you could structure it to help them, again, build over the semester their sort of knowledge, leading towards creating this kind of final project. So we wanted to give you all a chance. I know we're coming close to time, but we wanted to give you all a chance to add your thoughts. If this has spurred any thoughts for you on how you could do this in the library context, feel free to drop those in chat and share those with us. We would love to hear ideas from this community. This is a wonderful community of instruction librarians. And so, we know that you probably have ideas as well. So feel free to drop those in there. I'll take a look and see if there's anything popping up in chat. You may all be just blown away and have no additional comments, and that's okay too. It is the afternoon. Oh, good question. So one of the questions in chat is it one of the goals of the fellowship to encourage students to go into the library field? I don't know if it's overtly one of the goals, but I do think that it does encourage students to think about that, because they definitely all leave it knowing more about the nuances of our profession. Like we mentioned, some students are working with an archivist, some are working with a librarian and faculty team. So I don't know. I wish I knew, but I'm guessing that there have been students who've left the fellowship program considering it as a possibility, because it's something that, their awareness of what our profession, the nuances of our profession, I think increases substantially by working with us.
My understanding was that the benefactor, is it John Buchanan? Just loved his experience in the library so much that he wanted other students to have that experience.
All right, another question. Is there any plan to expand the number of fellowships? That's a good one. At Vanderbilt, we have the fund for the fellowships, and librarians and their faculty friends, we submit our fellowship idea to the teaching and learning librarian who's over the Buchanan fellowships, and they approve the ones that they want to have for the year. So ours wasn't the only one running. There was actually quite a few this semester. And every semester is kind of a different number. Someone asked what platform was our presentation in. Our slides, if that's what you're wondering about, those are in Canva.
Did any of the fellowship participants mention how they plan to use what they learned, share with friends, etc.? Like we mentioned, one of them is pre-med. Paging Dr. Google is off to medical school, and I think that he plans to apply what he learned to his future medical practice and communicating with patients. I've also been in early talks with a curriculum developer at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital about patient education using that student's learning module, and Vanderbilt's undergoing an arts and sciences curriculum redesign for a couple of gen ed courses, where we've mentioned the social media and mental health module fitting in really well. But did any of your fellows mention specific ways they were going to use theirs?
I feel like you covered that. The one student who's going to med school was very passionate about health literacy and helping young patients. Their plan was to go and be a pediatrician or some kind of in a profession that works with children and youth. So I think for sure that student will be taking this.
And I'll mention the question, what would you do differently next time when offering the fellowship opportunity? I've discussed with Sarah potentially, if she's willing, doing this with students creating content and taking it into senior homes. So same idea, but with materials for senior citizens going into senior centers and assisted living facilities. As far as what we would do differently, we would definitely have more, I think, examples on the front end, although we've already got them in there now. I don't know if we change the format. Would we change the format? I think we'd stick with it probably.
Yeah, I think it worked well. I mean, and I think it worked well for our schedules as well. But the students seem to like that independent format because again, they're already in all their classes and working, and so it kind of allowed them to carve out the space where it worked for them to get their work done. So yeah, I think that format, as far as scheduling goes, I think I would keep that.
And one of my fellows mentioned it helping her with her time management skills because she had not done an independent study. So maybe a bonus.
All right. Well, our contact information is on the screen. If you have follow-up questions, or you think of something later on when you're reviewing, feel free to reach out to myself or Emily. I know we'd be happy to talk with you more about it or just brainstorm ideas. We are happy to do that. So thank you again for coming.